Hi, it's Manusum Kiza. In the past, we've looked at buy and sell agreements, and you can have a look at some of those videos under the section of business assurance. But today, we want to just cover what happens in an event of a share buyback, which is slightly different to what buy and sell agreements are, but nonetheless, it's still the buying and selling of shares. But however, the interesting thing about the share buybacks is that the company is buying back its own shares from the individual shareholder. So let's have a look at that. I think to get a snapshot of how share buybacks can be used for the purpose of succession planning, we can just quickly do an example so we can just see how facts flow. I mean, obviously things will never be the same, but by doing the example, it will just give us a snapshot of how share buybacks are used using life policies. So let's just have a look at the quick facts of our couple.
John is 62 years old and is married to Anna. They have a grown son who is married and runs a successful law firm in Australia. John is a 70% shareholder in a diesel mechanics business that he started many years ago. He specializes in diesel vehicles and receives most of his clients from referrals from top car manufacturers. From a humble start, the business is now worth 100 million rands. However, over the years, more and more manufacturers are producing electric cars. A new dawn has come in the automotive industry since he is near retirement. He would rather exit the business through a buyout by management who have the legs to evolve the business, while diesel engines will be around for some time to come. He believes his management is more than capable of taking the company to new heights for purposes of estate planning. The question is, does John have peace of mind? Will management or the company have the funds to purchase his shareholding in case something happens to him? Does he have an exit strategy to liquidate his shareholding and benefit his heirs?
So from a diagram perspective, this is what it looks like. We know that John owns 70% shares in the company, the diesel shop, that's what we'll just call it, very imaginative. We have shareholder one who owns 10%, shareholder two 10%, and shareholder three 10%. Now, the value of the company is worth 100 million. So we know that John's share of the business is therefore 70 million rands. Now, over the years, let's assume that the company is made some nice profits and they're sitting with 20 million rands as a cash position that they have. They've literally got 20 million rands in the bank. They've had a good run over the past couple of years. Now, the company has a couple of options with what to do with this 20 million rands. First one could be to simply save those funds, the 20 million rands. However, the problem is for John and the other three shareholders, you don't start a company if you want to save money. So you want to probably invest it and make the money, make your capital work for you. Otherwise, you just put it in the bank if you want to save money. So that could be an option. The second one is to invest the funds. This could be for growth opportunities. Like in our example, the mechanic shop is probably going to need to invest in probably, let's say, upgrading the workshop so that they can cater for electric cars, in our example. So that could be an investment in order to look forward to servicing electric cars in the future. The third option could be to pay a dividend. I mean, we have shareholders, shareholders 1 to 3. You could just pay them a handsome dividend. The capital has worked for them, so that's great. Or the fourth option, which is what we're going to look at, is we could do a share buyback. Now, there are many reasons why a company would do a share buyback. So I'm not going to cover all of them. I mean, obviously we'll be here the whole day, but just to maybe just illustrate one. Sometimes it's called a bit of financial, engineering. So, let's say that the diesel shop is under pressure and they feel like the share price is undervalued and they're a growth company. They really want to be attracting shareholders. So what they could do is, if we know that the assets of the company, they just assume that they are worth 100 million rands. The assets of the company are worth 100 million rands, and that we know that the earnings of the company for that year were 20 million rands. Now, invariably, what this means is that if you divide the 20 million rands by the assets of the company, you get basically a return of 20%. So the company is doing great. So that's the earnings in terms of expressed as a percentage. Now, if a company had to, like I say, do a bit of financial engineering, they could decide that they could take a portion of this 20 million rands and actually buy back some of its shares back from its investors, being John and the other three shareholders, in order to make the company look more profitable. So let's now, if for example, they've used out of this 20 million rands, let's assume that they've used 10 million rands of it to buy back shares from the shareholders, and now their assets are left at 90 million rands. So obviously, the different shareholders, by the company buying back those shares, at least they would have cashed out in a sense. Now, however, for the same period, the earnings haven't changed. They've still remained at 20 million rands. I mean, those are the earnings for the year. Now, if you look at the calculation, we know that we've made 20 million rands over the period. However, now you're dividing by assets, which are a bit less because we spent 10 million rands repurchasing those shares. And that gives you a return of 22%. So all of a sudden, without increasing your earnings over here, just by a little bit of financial engineering, you can actually represent that the assets are actually earning a return of 22%. So that's quite a good return. So that's a bit of financial engineering. But let's assume that our managers are not trying to do a bit of fancy footwork in order to look their company look good. Let's say we want to engage in a share buyback for the sake of succession planning for John, because he's the older shareholder, and what he wants to do is really to exit the business in an unplanned event of, say, death or disability. And without the financial fancy footwork, they actually do want to invest into the company and grow their capacity to be able to service both diesel and electric cars. So let's assume that at the end of the year, the company decides to spend their cash in the following way. So let's say they put away 5 million rands, to save as cash just for the purpose of liquidity. And because they so desperately need to grow their capacity, they invest 10 million rands into being able to, for the future, to be able to service electric cars. And let's say they declare a dividend of 5 million rands to the current shareholders. Now, with just this calculation already, we would have spent our 20 million rands over here. So what, for the purposes of succession planning, what we're really trying to carve out is an unplanned event for John. What happens if John passes away or gets disabled? Now that means that since the value of his shares are worth 70 million rands and his estate needs to be wound up, shareholder 1, 2, and 3 could purchase John's shareholding. But let's assume in our case that they don't have a 70 million rands, so they'll then need to fund it. However, because they don't want to hold this 70% in their own hands, let's assume, for example, because they'll be investing over here into growing the capacity for the company, instead of purchasing all of John's 70% shareholding, they actually want to have the company buy back John's shares. That 70% must go back to the company and be held by the actual company. Now, the company could decide to do that for a whole string of reasons. They could decide, for example, shareholder 1, 2, and 3 could say that while we're going to be spending 10 million rands so that we can build capacity for our company, we would like to, in the future, reserve a portion of the shares that have been bought back by the company at this point so that we can issue them to new investors. So how will they attract new investors? Well, they would have invested a large portion of their money 10 million rands into making sure that they grow capacity, in our example, so that you can attract new investors to come in the company. And when those new investors come in, you better have shares at hand to offer them, so that they could be getting those shares to offer those new investors from those shares that they bought from John. So on the death or disability of John, because it is a company that needs 70 million rands, it could then, what it could do is take out a life policy on the life of John for 70 million rands. So that on the passing of John, this 70 million rands is paid to the company so that the company can actually buy those shares. Now, what's nice about that, about funding from a life policy, is that number one, it could be a whole host of reasons. Like in our example here, we know that we've used up the cash because we needed it. We know that we needed to grow the business and business capacity, so we've used up the 10 million rands. And then we know that we've paid out dividends for 5 million rands. So we don't have any cash anymore to actually fund, for the company to fund the purchase of 70 million rand should John did pass away or get disabled. So under share buyback, what we could do here is to put an agreement in place, to put this cover into place. So although we don't need 70 million rands in cash, a policy that we've just spoken about could be taken out, and whatever that premium is, let's just call it out in our example. I'm obviously not being realistic, I'm just stomach-sucking figures. Let's say that premium is 7,000 rands per month on the life of John. Now, it means that when John passes away, that 70 million rands will be ready available to the company so that it can purchase John's shares. The cost of it will obviously, of course, be the premium. The converse of that, having not placed the policy, is that one, we're going to try and fund, if John had to pass away, we would try and fund the purchase of John's shares by cash, but we know that we don't have cash anymore because we've used it for the 5 million rands. We've used it for 10 million rands. We so desperately need to grow the capacity of the company, and we've paid off dividends of 5 million rands. So cash is actually not an option in my scenario. The other option that the company could look at is to actually debt finance the whole transaction. Now, without going into details about the company's acts and solvency and liquidity issues, which is not the focus of this, if the company, just on a high level, if the company had financed the acquisition of John's shares for 70 million rands, now you imagine that going forward, the company will obviously be serving a lot of debt. It's a burden to have the debt of 7 million rands, having to service that debt and so on. So while cash is not an option, debt might be quite an expensive option if available to the company. So barring all else, if a policy is being able to be issued on the life of John, this could prove to be a far cheaper way where a policy for 10,000 rands is put in place, and then an agreement would be a share buyback by the company. And this agreement would state that on the passing of John, that the policy that the company has taken out, those funds, the 70 million rands, pays to the company. And then in terms of this agreement, the company is then obliged to purchase John's shares for 70 million rands. And by doing so, after the policy has paid to the company, in terms of this agreement, the company then must pay John's deceased estate the 70 million rands. Now, once the 70 million rands is sitting in John's deceased estate, he's been able to exit the company, and then he can then leave the funds to his heirs according to his will or whatever the case may be. But by doing this, he's been able to liquidate his investment in the event of death or disability. So I know the facts were kept quite simple, and I did that on purpose. And I think the point is, obviously, a case would depend case by case. You know, we have to sit down with the clients. Do they want a shared buyback agreement, or do they actually just want a simple buy and sell agreement that we've covered in earlier videos under the business assurance section? So it is a consultation with the clients. However, should the client, for whatever reason, as in our case where John actually wants to exit the business in the event of his death or disability, if that is the purpose and they've decided to agree to go into a share buyback agreement, Then the important thing from a product perspective is that once that financing structure is put in place, because it's all well and good to have the agreement, but once that life policy is put in place, that it gets structured correctly so that we can be able to achieve what we want to achieve for the purpose of John's succession planning. So I hope that video helps. It was just really a high level of what share buybacks are. But like, again, I say it's always a case-by-case basis, and you just have to take it at that. There are a whole lot of other issues I haven't discussed, like issues that involve corporate law, basically. Things like before the company can buy back John's shares, they have to meet solvency and liquidity requirements in order to show that they can still pay off their debts, within the next 12 months after the transaction. However, again, putting a policy in place ensures that when on the passing of John, with the 70 million coming in, you offer extra funding to just purely look at that transaction to purchase John's shares, while the business is not being disturbed in terms of being able to pay off its creditors within the next 12 months or so. So I didn't touch on that aspect for now. I just really honed in on the life policy aspect of it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.